Hello and welcome to the Yarra Valley Living Centre and another episode of Living Well. And we're going back to Taiwan today, and we're going to be with Pia Giamasi, and she's joining us from Kaohsiung. Hi, Pia.
Hi, Maureen. So nice to be with you.
Yeah, and the background there's so beautiful. The ocean sound cabin. You know, Taiwan's an island, and Pia's little place is overlooking the ocean. So you can put yourself there in that beautiful space. So lovely. We're going to be speaking about Confucius. Actually, Pia's lived for how long in Taiwan, Pia?
Off and on for 30-something years.
Yeah, and she's absolutely fluent in Chinese, and in fact has translated a book by Master Nan, a very great Buddhist master, and her master for many years. And she has translated his book on Confucius. So today we're going to be exploring what that can offer us, because our series is called Living Well. So we're always looking at things that can help us to live well. So Pia, first of all, what would you say is the essence? What was the core message of the great master, Confucius?
I would say it was benevolence, to have the best interest, to have, the best interest of everybody you are influencing or everybody that you are in relationship with, to have the best interest of everybody in mind.
Wow, very beautiful consciousness. And what can you give us a little lead into where this wisdom came into, existence historically, and, what's a little background to Confucius?
I think the historical background of Confucius is really very, very important for understanding what he was trying to convey through his teachings, what he was trying to do. All right, so in previous dynasties, like in very, very ancient Chinese history, they had a very high level of culture. There was like music and poetry and writing and systems of governance, and I mean there were even female leaders. There were governance by parliament, and it was a very, very high level of culture and awareness, and a very great spirit, a spirit of making sure that everybody is well. But by the time Confucius was born, he was born into the time which is called the Warring States period, which is
when was that? Can you put a date on that, roughly?
Around 2,500 years ago. Yeah. So he was contemporary with Lao Tzu, and around the same time as Buddha, around the same time as Pythagoras.
And so Abraham, I believe. Abraham's also dated around that time.
I don't know. But many great spiritual beings on the planet at that time. It was very energetic high point in humanity, I would say. But in China at that time, there were the land had broken up into warring factions. So there were different military leaders who were in charge of different sections. It had kind of broken into these feuding clans, perhaps is the best way to understand it. And Confucius was afraid that because of all this war, that all of the young people, especially at that time, young men were expected to get education, whereas women were expected to be educated in how to, take care of a household. But the formal education was more for the men. And so the men were being conscripted into different armies. And that, like, your prowess as a warrior was praised and rewarded, and that was where all of the training was going. And he was very worried that the culture that had been, like that high level of culture would be lost in the midst of all of this warring, and that, like society's baser, what do we call it? Baser energies, baser motivations would be driving people throughout life. And Pikachu.
Can't have an island without dogs.
Yeah, not a village without dogs. So he's trying to protect me probably against somebody with an umbrella.
So Pia, just as we're going into talking about Confucius, can you give a little historical context to his message and the time and what was going on?
Okay, so Confucius was contemporary with Lao Tzu in China. The one who wrote the Tao Te Ching. They even met. They met in person and had a lot of respect for each other, but and poked fun of each other as well too, in a way. And he was also contemporary with Pythagoras, I believe, and sometime close to when the Buddha was on the earth as well. So many great spiritual masters were around at that time. Yeah. So China, prior to Confucius, the time of Confucius was alive at the Warring States period in China, when there were different feudal lords that were in control of different areas of the country, and all vying to be the greatest power. Prior to this Warring States period, China was in a very, it was a period of very high culture in which there was, it was flourishing with music and poetry and, statesmanship. The country was ruled by councils. And there were even during certain periods of time, there were even women on the council ruling the country, which was, I think, it was a testament to their level of openness and awakening. And by the time that Confucius was there, he was very worried that this high culture, this high state of that had arisen would disappear because most of the young men were being conscripted into the army. So culture was not seen as something important to be taught to the young generation, because all of these different feudal lords, they wanted a powerful army. They didn't want scholars. And in their courts, what they, because they were warriors, they were more interested in dancing women and, the more baser aspects of like popular culture was important to them. Divination, things that would tell them whether or not they would be successful in an attempt to overthrow their neighbors, or strategists, who was more cunning. So that kind of thing was prized, whereas Confucius was concerned with keeping the torch of the great spirit of the previous culture, the previous level of culture. So he took it upon himself to take many of the teachings, like he collected all of the great poetry, and he made the classic of poetry, the classic of music, I think, which was lost in later generations. The classic in kind of like an encyclopedia of knowledge about different animals and flora and fauna and medicinal plants, et cetera, history and geology. So it was kind of like a book which was, a collection of books which were sort of like an encyclopedia. So he collected all these and simplified them, because he couldn't he couldn't keep all of the books, and books were being burned. Books were not, they were being destroyed, or
just not
kind of
being
like
valued. Yeah.
exactly. So that's what his whole mission was, to keep this, plus all of the customs that embodied the spirit, the greater spirit of Chinese culture, ancient Chinese culture.
Yeah, that's already very interesting, because when I visited Confucius temples in China, in Taiwan, Vietnam, it's always set up like a school, and there was so much emphasis on study. But now I can understand why. So like you say, the historical context is very important. And study was very, very important. Is that correct? Was that the most important thing, or is that just how it's portrayed now?
I think no, that's just how it's portrayed. I mean, like traditionally they would have children memorize texts, because that's like, children's memories are, at that point, their ability to memorize is incredible. All of their synapses are all open, and so he would say, memorize the I Ching, memorize the, memorize all of the, from they had like a series of classics from, you would start like when you're like something you would memorize when you were 2, when you were 3, when you were 4 or 5, and their memory was stimulated to the point where they had great amounts of information at their fingertips, and then they would start to learn what it meant.
Did they actually have writing at that time? Why did they memorize it?
They memorized it so that it became part of the fabric of who you were. So that it became like you were able to use it, especially the teachings about how to be a good person. Those are like that's the first thing that a child would memorize.
Right. Because, my first deep exposure, I would say, to, I don't know if you call it deep, but my broad exposure to Confucianism was in Malaysia. And I wasn't left with a very good impression, because to me, what I saw is it was being used like, you must respect your elder brother. Even if your elder brother's a cheat, you still have to respect older brother. And there was a lot of corruption I saw. And so I wasn't, and also it came across as very misogynist. So I didn't have a good impression. And also people comparing with each other in the society. There was a lot of comparison and having to be better than the other one. But when I was in Taiwan, when I asked the people, because I found the people, as I'm sure you do, to be very cultured, very polite, really quite amazing. In fact, I was surprised that people still exist en masse with that kind of culture. And most of the people told me it was because of their studies of Confucianism, and it was taught in school, in the family. So I got a very different impression.
Yeah, I think that actually my teacher, Master Nan, had a very different interpretation of Confucius, and his book on Confucius came out, when was that? Maybe nearly 50 years ago. And I think it really changed people's understanding of the essence. Because what happened historically, can I go into a little bit more of about history?
Yeah, we're about halfway through, so you can just pace yourself.
Okay. So after Confucius, the Tang Dynasty arose in China. Like it was, after Confucius, the Tang Dynasty started to arrive, which was kind of like the Renaissance era of China, in which the arts flourished. People became very liberal-minded. They were, they like beauty, and it was, people were wealthy. It was really a great Renaissance. And there were, towards the end of the Tang Dynasty, and Buddhism was coming in at that point of time. And during the Tang Dynasty, it was a time when a lot of Buddhist teachings or texts were being translated. And towards the end, because they're like the liberation of females was also a part of the Tang dynasty. Like the position of females in society was becoming much more open, much more equal to men. And there were those who were very conservative minded who were very much against that. And there was one man called Zhu Xi, and Zhu Xi, he kind of made his way up the political ladder. And when he got to a point of a specific point of office, he dictated that his particular very patriarchal, very top down kind of interpretation on Confucius was the standard for all of the imperial exams. So the imperial exams are the exams that you take to take any position in government and leadership, in the judicial area, etc. And also it trickled down into scholarship as well. So when that became the standard view of Confucius, that kind of embedded itself into society when everybody was trying to, year after year after year, trying to adhere themselves to that view so that they could get a position, so that they could, become a leader within the society. And that stuck, and that kind of for the next 1,500 years until the present day, which is a lot of what the Cultural Revolution in China was about. They didn't want any more of that. So that was a lot of what the students and people started going overseas, and we're kind of getting other kinds of messages about how society could operate, and the idealistic youth were like, no, we don't want any more of this kind of oppression from Confucius. So that was a lot of the beginnings in the early 1900s of the Cultural Revolution. And Master Nan he was young at that time, and was also kind of like listening and like, what's good about the traditional culture? What's good about traditional education? What's good about the Western education? So he was in the midst of all of this upheaval and all of these different things being positioned against each other. And when he came to Taiwan, he was kind of like, he's like, no, I don't think we should throw the baby away with the bathwater. I think there's a lot of value in Chinese culture that needs to be re-examined. And why did Confucius, he looked at Confucian text prior to Zhu Xi, and he was just like, wait a minute, something happened.
Okay.
There was a big change in the interpretation, prior to and post. And so he went back and looked at that and wanted to revive that.
What I like, what you said to me when you were translating the book, is that you felt that Master Nan almost kind of, I'm just using that expression, but almost like channeled Confucius. He really got in touch with the spirit behind Confucianism. So that's very valuable, very beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it has got value when it goes back to its origins, just like, many of the religions have been politicized and corrupted. Confucianism went through the same journey.
Yes. Definitely.
So how do you think it's affected your life, having translated the book, which means spending how many years?
Oh, over 2 years.
Yeah. So you were kind of imbued with this deep, I would say, beautiful teaching when it's gone back to the origins. What effect did it have on you?
That's
changed.
Number one, my impression of Confucius completely changed.
Right.
And sometime in the middle, I kind of felt like when I would look forward to my date with Confucius that day, or sort of like I was in this romance with Confucius during that time, because it was lovely. Master Nan's interpretation, he kept coming back to um, governing with heart, governing yourself from the heart. And so like the idea of governing yourself is one of not ruling, but to govern yourself, you put yourself in measure. So a lot of what Confucius talked about, like from why music was so important, is because of like this kind of a rhythm of life, this measure, not too much and not too little, and so that things are in harmony. So harmony was also like of utmost importance. So just kind of reevaluating, oh, how do I bring more harmony into my life, into relationships with people who are, you know, like my teachers or elders, and those who are, you know, who I am teaching. How do I create a harmonious relationship? And so looking at that aspect, I think that was very, very important. That word harmony.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because, you know, Usher that I was living with in Taiwan, she's a tea master, trained tea master. So she's from Korea. So basically quite a hierarchical culture. And then tea master, it's got quite a lot of hierarchy. And then even within the Brahma Kumaris, there's some of that. So I found it very interesting that she had this, like, for example, when we came home, she would always expect me to go to the bathroom first because I'm senior. And yet, on the other side, she wasn't subservient, because she was herself a tea master. So she's been the master, she's been the junior, so to speak. So it was very beautiful, and it did kind of have a natural harmony about it, because it's just going along with it. It's not like taking advantage or being bossy or being subservient. She wasn't. In fact, if I didn't behave in a way she would have preferred, she'd say to me, you know, you're my senior, I think this, you know, so she'd point things out. It was a beautiful relationship. And yet hierarchy in the West is not seen to be something anyone's really feeling in favor of. But I think when it's done well, it's harmonious.
Because there's respect. Respect is also at the heart of it. Like, Confucius talked a lot about respect, but like true respect, because he would also say that, like, you know, just feeding and clothing your parents, you would do the same thing for your horse or your dog. So he said respecting your parents is not just about, you know, making sure that they have food on their table. That it's like if they're sick, and it's not just, you know, like he said, it's how does your face look when you go into care? You know, like if they're ill, do you have a smile on your face? Are you really concerned with their well-being? You know, or you know, or your child or whatever. Are you really teaching them, or are you just giving them material things? Because if you're not giving them spiritual food, you're not respecting your role as a parent. You're not respecting them as a person, because they rely on you to teach them how to be an honorable, upright person. You know, the parents are there, the role that when you take on the role of a parent, you are the role model. So you also need to embody that. You respect your own life. So that this kind of like modeling and respecting and really coming from the heart and doing things not just perfunctorily, but truly caring for other people in your life in different ways that are proper to your relation to them, in relation to what position you hold, you know, in relation to them.
So it sounds like another key element of the whole teachings of Confucius is around relationships and how to cultivate, you know, it's a very subtle aspect, isn't it? Like the way, you know, to bring in the modeling, but the wisdom and the humility, that smile on the face. It's quite all-rounded compared to a lot of the things we would read about, improving relationships. So very deep and subtle.
Yeah. And there was one very beautiful message that Confucius put across, that there was like interactions. Most of Confucius, what was left are his interactions or conversations with his students. So he asked his students at one point, like, what would you consider the height of what do you call it? Success in your life? And one student said, oh, if I could rule over this country and have everybody be wealthy, I would be successful. One person said, oh, if I could be a great ambassador and have peace between the different feudal lords, then my life would be successful. And then one other student who was playing an instrument at that time, Confucius turned to him and said, and you, Dian, what would you feel is the height of success in life for you? He said, for me, it would be to, with my family and my friends, for us to go down to the river after winter has broken, and in our lovely, beautiful spring clothes, we would have a picnic by the river. We would sing, we would, enjoy each other's company, and then go back home happy and have a lovely meal. And Confucius said, yes, I'm with you, Dian. This is what it's all about.
Because of course that would overflow into whatever you do, wouldn't it? Like if you've got that kind of wellness within yourself, then it would come out in your business, in your relationships, in everything you do. Oh, Pia, thank you so much for sharing. Actually, I want to say so much, but it's so little because there's so much more to explore. But is this book available? I know when I was there, it wasn't quite available. Is it available yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh, well, I'll let people know as soon as it is, because I know it's being published by the Beijing Press. Is that correct?
No, not by the, it's been kind of shuffled here and there.
Okay.
Put on the back burner.
Yeah. Anyway, it will come at the right time, but until then, at least we've got this much to think about. But I wouldn't even, what would you suggest people to look at if they were a little bit more interested? Because a lot of the things wouldn't come out like you're speaking about. So should they wait for this book to get a proper introduction to Confucius?
That would be the most in-depth. But I also did a podcast and with a very in-depth 1.5-hour interview with my friend Michael Max. And that podcast is online. You can listen to it for free. Okay,
so we'll put your name up on this presentation so people can look you up, and also Michael Max.
Yes.
Michael Max, that's an easy name to remember.
Yeah, very easy.
Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Taiwan. Is there one little snippet of wisdom from Confucius that you can leave us with?
Confucius, at one time, he listened to some beautiful music, and he said food tasted bland for about 1.5 months after that incredible music. So I think Confucius I think his approach to life is about enjoying the beauty of things, enjoying your friends, enjoying your parents while they're still there, and being appreciative of your teachers, just appreciating everything that life brings to you when you're in a time of peace, when you're in nature, when you have good food. Yeah, just to deeply experience all the different parts of your life. I think that was really what his teachings were all about, deeply experiencing everything and appreciating it.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And that's something for us to take away and think about. And I will let people know when the book comes out, and hopefully we'll get you back again then for a part 2 of this, because there's so much more to share with us. But thank you very much, Pia. And thank you everyone for joining us. And yeah, see you next time.
See you next time. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.